everyone. Welcome to the first deck tech of 2021. Oh, I've taken about a 3-week break from deck techs during the holidays. It's something I needed anyway, but I'm happy to be back. I've, of course, been brewing even during that break, trying out different deck formulas, and something I've tried to make work since last year was Knuckleblade in Modern. I really like Knuckleblade. I feel like it was probably like one mana off or one power or toughness point off from being super playable in the format. It's just an awesome card, and I feel it is slightly underplayed, but there are just better options overall in the format. But I think you can make it work, and that's the case I'm going to be giving to today. The case is Savage Knuckleblade in Modern, in our Temur deck, of course, because it kind of has to be Temur. And we're moving on to the mid-range part of Modern, so we're not playing heavy permission here. We're looking for the mid to late game, and let's take a look at the core. So, of course, in the core, at least what I consider the core of this deck, you have Savage Knuckleblade. So let's take a look at Savage Knuckleblade, because not a lot of you probably even know that Savage Knuckleblade exists. So for 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 red, you have a 4/4 Ogre Warrior. So 3 mana for a 4/4, okay. In Modern, obviously not enough. So let's take a look at its abilities. For 2 colorless and a green, Savage Knuckleblade gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. So obviously if you have 9 mana, you can't just activate this 9 times. That would have made Savage Knuckleblade a lot more playable. Or if it gave it Trample, which would have been awesome. Again, would have made Savage Knuckleblade more playable. But okay, +2/+2, that does change the math, calculus for you and your opponent. Allows it to hit, it allows it to hit up, and it's something your opponent has to keep in mind. Now, for 2 colorless and a blue, return Savage Knuckleblade to its owner's hand. So you're returning it back to your hand if you want to protect it from removal, or you want to chump block, but you don't want to lose Savage Knuckleblade. You could always bring it back to your hand, and it's also doable. You'll use it less often, but it's an option. And last, and this is the ability I use most often with Knuckleblade, is 1 red. It gets haste until end of turn. So, turn 4, for 4 mana, 2 of it being red, you have a 4/4 haste, which is not that bad. You'd be surprised. Sometimes you're at the late game and you just need one more swing to hit your opponent. And, late game, every turn really, really matters, because it could be between winning and losing at that point. So the ability to have Savage Knuckleblade come down and not have to wait for Summoning Sickness, so just giving it haste and potentially even pumping it up +2/+2, really nice finisher. Comes out of nowhere. If your opponent can't remove it, it's a problem. And it's a 4/4 out the gate, so you're not gonna be able to lightning bolt it. You're gonna need Dismember, Fatal Push with the Revolt trigger. The amount of removal spells is diminished with Savage Knuckleblades, which is a good thing. So all in all, I really like this creature. We just don't have enough with it, and I want to present to you the rest of the deck and how it works. So of course you have Tarmogoyf. I'm playing Temur, I'm playing green. I love Tarmogoyf. I'm Delver of Brews. Apart from Delver of Secrets, Tarmogoyf is always going to be in the decks I can play it in. And you're going to be playing 4 of here, of course. ice-fang Quaddle. Another great card. I mean, it's not necessarily the core of the deck, but it does play a big role. It's flash, it has flying, it allows you to draw a card, which is great. And it comes out with a 1/1 body, which is awesome. And like I said, it flies. And if you have at least 3 other snow permanents, which are going to be from your lands in this instance, it has Death Touch, which is great because it's kind of like pseudo removal. If your opponent's swinging in with a big creature and you have no removal at hand, ice-fang Quaddle can come down and flash, chump it with Death Touch, and they both die. So ice-fang Quaddle, pretty great here, and the draw ability is also very powerful, and can draw into more of your threats. So let's take a look at the rest of the creatures. So let's start with the middle one here. I put Uro in the middle. I mean, listen, I could have built this deck without Uro, and I think this deck can work without Uro. We can swap it out, maybe put in an extra Huntmaster, put in an extra Keranos, or find another creature to fill in the gaps. So this deck definitely works without Uro. I want to make that clear. But since we can play with him, why not? I am putting it here. I didn't make it a point to not put Uro in this deck, but I just wanted to make that point. You can play without Uro, but it's here. It does increase the power level of the deck. So of course we want to play powerful decks. We don't want to play decks that are purposefully handicapped. Apart from Uro, though, I have a 1 of Huntmaster of the Fells, and I have a 1 of Keranos, God of Storms. So apart from another card that you're going to see in a few screens, which is going to be Batterskull, spoiler alert, these are essentially just my 1 of. So they're not central to the deck, they're not central to the strategy. They each pose their own threat when they hit the battlefield. So Huntmaster of the Fells, as you very much know, I love this card. It's top 3 apart from Tarmogoyf and Delver of Secrets. I really love Huntmaster of the Fells. I would have played more, but I had to have a proper balance in terms of CMC and, you know, amount of lands that I'm playing and so on and so forth. But yeah, I have a 1 of Huntmaster of the Fells. If I don't really like Keranos, God of Storms, or if you don't like Keranos, God of Storms, you can always take Keranos out, put in a second Huntmaster, that works, or a 4th Uro if you really want to. But Huntmaster of the Fells, really, really good at grinding out games, really, really good at closing out games if your opponent doesn't have the answers to remove it in time. Very, very, very powerful card. Keranos, God of Storms, topping out the mana curve here at 5 CMC. But again, when it comes down, it's really going to put a clock on your opponent, because every turn, you're either going to be drawing an extra card, or you're going to be dealing 3 damage to a creature or a player. Very, very, very powerful. It's kind of passive. It's indestructible. You don't really care about the devotion. You could hit its devotion requirements, but it's not really the point here. That would be icing on the cake, essentially. You're mostly playing it, or I'm mostly playing it for its main ability, which is revealing the first card you draw on each of your turns. Whenever you reveal a land card this way, draw a card, so it doesn't feel as bad when you're revealing a land card. Or, if it's not a land card, if it's a non-land card, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player, so you have a lightning bolt every turn. Worst case. So, you know, that's pretty good. So those would round out the rest of the creatures of the deck, kind of bringing everything close, kind of bringing it all together with the core. So let's move on to the cantrips. So Serum Visions, of course, we're playing blue. It's really the best you're going to get. I wouldn't play any other cantrip before Serum Visions. You know, for 1 CMC, you're going through 3 cards. I can't tell you how powerful that is, at least in Modern. And although, I mean, it's kind of weird to put an artifact in a cantrip, but it is a cantrip at the end of the day. Mishra's Bauble for 0 mana. Sacrifice it, look at the top card of your library or opponent's library, it doesn't really matter. And you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So, very useful if you want to use it in conjunction with your own fetch to see if the next card you're about to draw is useful or not. If it's not useful, you can fetch away. If it is useful, you keep it there, and then you can crack Mishra's Bauble. You could fetch after you draw that card. So, there's a lot of play you could have here, or you could target your opponent, see what they're about to draw, and plan your turn accordingly. So let's move on to the removal. So we are playing Snowlands, and you'll see that in the land section of this deck tech. So Skred actually has some playability here. You know, sometimes in Temur, or oftentimes in Temur, something that Temur lacks is removal of larger creatures, and Skred helps in that instance. So in the late game, as you have more lands on the battlefield, as you have ice-fang Coatl on the battlefield, which is a snow creature, which counts, of course, you know, you might have to be dealing with bigger creatures that you don't have proper removal for. Skred will take care of those creatures, because by then it'll be dealing 4, 5, maybe even 6 damage, and you know, that could be a big difference for you if it could kill an Uro for you, or a Grimag Angler, or whatever it may be, and you don't have to pay 4 life for Dismember to do it. And if it's not that big, it doesn't really matter. Even if Skred is only dealing 2 damage or 3 damage, it's an extra piece of removal to remove creatures, and I think that's perfectly fine. Lightning Bolt, 4 of, it's Lightning Bolt. Whether you're new to the format or you're not, you've probably seen Lightning Bolt, and you know why it's so powerful. It's in this deck. And we have Tarfire, a pet card. I really love Tarfire. I mean, it's really only here because of its tribal instant card type, so it counts as tribal and instant. So when it's in the battlefield, when it's in your graveyard, it grows your Tarmogoyf by 2, not by 1, assuming you don't have no other instants in your graveyard at that point. So very, very powerful. So put it this way, you know, turn 1, you fetch, you Tarfire your opponent, or you Tarfire one of their creatures. You now have 2 cards in your graveyard, but your Tarmogoyf is a 3/4 because you have a tribal, an instant, and a land. That's why I love Tarfire. That's why it's in this deck. You could play something else if you really want to, but I had the space and I'm playing it. So the permission. I'm unfortunately, at least for me, not playing a full playset of Force of Negation. We're going easy on the permission here. We're not going all the way on permission, mostly because you have to devote more space for creatures, more space for lands, more space for removal and other types of threats. So permission package is smaller, and you can play around with it if you want to. If you don't like to pitch spells, so you could get rid of Force of Negations, up your spell snare and mana leak count, or play Remand if we really want to. You could play around here a lot more, and I would suggest you play around with the permission package depending on your meta or how your playstyle is. But this is something more suited to me. I do like to have at least 2 Force of Negations on hand. In a game, they could come in handy to deal with whatever I'm dealing with. Spell Snare is relevant in Modern. There are still plenty of 2 CMC spells going on. So having Spell Snare in your hand is very powerful as well, and you could up that count as well. And Mana Leak, of course, it's Mana Leak. It's the best non-conditional counter spell you're going to get in Modern, at least in my opinion, at 2 mana. So, as long as your opponent has less than 3 mana open, you're countering whatever they're playing, which is powerful. Now the artifacts. So there's only really one, Batterskull, and this plays in the same vein as Huntmaster of the Fells and Karanos God of Storms. It's not a central piece to the puzzle. It's an extra threat. It's a different type of threat. Huntmaster is more aggressive threat. Karanos of the God of Storms is a more passive threat. Batterskull is kind of both in a way. I mean, it's more defensive. You get a token out of it, right? So it becomes a 4/4 vigilance and lifelink token, germ token, when it comes onto the battlefield. But even if you sacrifice that germ token, get 4 life out of it, you still have Batterskull on the battlefield that you can now equip to your Tarmogoyf, or more hilariously, your ice-fang Coatl. And, what's scarier than a 5/5 ice-fang Coatl with lifelink and vigilance? I don't know. There are plenty of scary things like that, but that would be pretty scary. So Batterskull, again, is just kind of more rounding out your extra threats, and you can think of it as a flex slot. If you don't like Batterskull, you don't have Batterskull, don't play it. Play another Huntmaster or something else, an extra spell, but I would recommend this kind of formulation in terms of threats. So last but not least, before we get on to the sideboard and the matchups, let's go look at the lands. So the lands relatively similar to past land mana bases that I've shown you guys in my previous deck techs. Let's start off with the shocks. So 1 Stomping Ground, 1 Breeding Pool, 2 Steam Vents. You can play around with these numbers if you want, but I've sculpted them in a way to fit the mana requirements of the deck and the amount of red you're going to see, the amount of blue you're going to see, green, so on. So this is how I've formulated the shocks. I suggest you stick to it, but if you want to play around, maybe play less shocks if you're on a budget, that's okay. But this is what I would recommend to be at a base competitive level. Then let's move on to your fetches. So I'm playing 2 Scalding Tarn here, not a full playset, and 4 Misty Rainforests. Again, I've tweaked these according to the requirements of the deck and how often I'm going to want to go get a basic forest, as opposed to an island or a mountain. I'm very often not going to be going and getting a basic mountain, so less Scalding Tarns, more Misty Rainforests, and I'm playing Prismatic Vista. Again, this could be 2 more Scalding Tarns and a Wooded Foothills if you really want. I just chose to play 3 Prismatic Vistas instead. Really doesn't matter. Prismatic Vista, the only difference with Prismatic Vista, of course, is that you can't go get Shock. You must get a basic. But apart from that, it works just like any other fetch. I think it's fine. It's the way I did it. You could do it any other way, as long as it's a fetch that's relevant. And then the lands, they're basic snow lands, which means nothing to you, at least, in terms of cost of deck building and working around them. They're just basics, and they're basics like any other. They're not affected by Blood Moon or anything. And they could be fetched by Prismatic Vista, of course. The only difference is that they will power your Scred, and they will give your ice-fang Coatl Death Touch. So, play them. That's why snow basics were kind of broken with Arkham's Astrolabe. Anyway, so those are your basics. I'm playing 2 forests, 4 islands, 1 mountain. Again, that's how I think it should be set up. That's how it works with the costs of your deck. You could play around if you want to. So let's move on to the sideboard. So I do have a different video I posted last year called Temur Sideboard Tech, where I go through all of the cards, or at least all of the common cards in Modern that you could use in your sideboard, specifically in Temur. So if you want an in-depth discussion, about 30 minutes long or 40 minutes long, I don't know how long it was, on all your options in Temur, I strongly recommend you set aside some time and watch that video, because I go into great lengths about all of these cards. Right now I'll go through a really quick summary of each one and why I'm playing them. Keep in mind, sideboards change from one meta to another. They change from one playstyle to another. So these cards can all be changed around. This is the final sideboard that I had at the time of, recording this deck tech. So 3 Veil of Summers, of course. You have green, you have access to green. If you're playing against Jund or hard black, or hard black deck, or counter permission deck, a control deck, Veil of Summer is going to become very important for you. So I play 3 of. I think 3 is a good number. Engineer Explosives, mostly they take out decks that go wide, that build a lot of tokens, whatever it may be, or just aggro decks in general that you want to pick at with Engineer Explosives. Powerful, and you're playing 3 different colors, so it could be up to 3 CMC in terms of permanence. Very powerful Engineer Explosives. I don't feel like it's played enough, but it's something that I enjoy playing with. Ceremonious Rejection is a 1-mana counterspell for colorless spells, so if you're playing Tron or any kind of artifact deck, for 1 blue mana, you're countering their artifact spell. Very useful. It could even be useful against Death and Taxes to counter Thought-Knot Seer or Reality Smasher, whatever it may be. So another useful card in the current meta. Blood Moon, the mana base that you have is well suited for Blood Moon. Keep in mind, if you are Blood Mooning, it's going to be difficult to cast Uro from your graveyard. Keep that in mind. If you're going to Blood Moon turn 3, just keep in mind you're going to be able to cast Uro from your hand. It'll probably be a while before you can escape it from the graveyard. Just keep that in mind. But if you're playing Blood Moon, you're probably playing it for a good reason. So, it might be worth that powering down of Uro. Ashiok Dreamrender for your graveyard strategies, or graveyard hate, I should say. Mostly if you're playing Dredge. Unfortunately for you, if you are. Or another strategy that relies heavily on the graveyard, like Storm or Control decks, whatever it may be. You bring in Ashiok Dreamrender to affect your opponent's graveyard, not yours. You're milling them at the same time, which is also very powerful. If you're playing a combo deck, you get rid of their combo pieces this way. So I think Ashiok Dreamrender is a pretty cool option. You can swap it out if you want to. Last but not least, 2 Abrades. If you're playing an artifact deck, and again, it's the type of card you would bring in, or if you're playing against a very aggro-y deck, a deck that plays a lot of creatures, or you just want extra removal to always have an answer to a creature, Abrade is also a pretty good option there. Alright, so last but not least, the matchups. So how well does Knuckleblade do against all of these matchups? So I play enough of my decks that I deck tech to have a relative idea of how it's going to go for each matchup in the current meta. Of course, your mileage will vary. You may be a much better Magic player than I am. You might be slightly less experienced than I am. You might have more luck than I do. You might have less luck than I do. Whatever the variance may be, this is my experience and how I feel this deck would work in each variant or each type of matchup. So let's go with combo. Now, unlike a lot of the other Temur decks that I've deck teched, your permission package is smaller. It's not as strong. You're not playing a tempo game here. You are in the mid-range world. You're not playing a control game here. So your initial permission package is smaller. It's shrunk, but you have enough there to give you a chance, at least in game 1. But depending on what you're playing against, so if you're playing in Storm, for example, you're going to have to get lucky with your counters to make sure they're in your hand, early on. You might have to side accordingly, or, you might have to change your sideboard accordingly if you feel like you're going to be playing a lot of combo decks or a lot of Storm-like decks, spell-based combo decks. If you're playing Primeval Titan decks or land decks, Blood Moon is going to be your go-to, of course, but you do have cards in your main board to be competitive with those type of decks as well. But again, your Blood Moon is really going to be something you're going to lean on hard to turn off the Valakut, for example. So combo decks, I would say 50-50. 50-50 on how Knuckleblade can currently work. Of course, you could always tweak your deck to be better against combo if you really need to. Aggro decks, I think you're actually pretty well suited for aggro decks. You have life gain in this main, you have a lot of removal in the main, and then in the sideboard, you could bring in, Engineer Explosives or Braid to increase your removal. So I think against aggro, unless you kept a poor hand or you didn't have a choice but keeping a poor hand, aggro decks, you are favored with aggro decks. So aggro decks, I'm pretty confident playing against. Then you have big mana decks. Of the Temur decks I've played, this deck probably has better play against big mana decks. Of course, at the end of the day, a turn 4 Ugin It's probably going to wreak havoc on you, but there's only so much you can do against a play like that. Blood Moon, again, will be very powerful in your game 2s and 3s. Ceremonious Rejection will also be powerful, so keep that in mind. Abrade as well to destroy any artifacts that your opponent might be playing. So you have a lot of tools in the main and a lot of tools in the side that I feel that your matchup against big mana is actually better than, let's say, my Temur Delver decks or the Temur Delver variants. So yeah, I think big mana, for once, it's not very often I can say this, you're actually well suited, or we're well placed for big mana decks. Not Magic or Dredge, but mostly not Magic is what I would call it. Listen, it's a crapshoot. Unfortunately, it's a crapshoot. If you do end up playing against a deck like Dredge, which is extremely non-interactive, they're playing Solitaire with themselves in their graveyard. You can tell I don't have a lot of respect for that mechanic. You're going to do the best you can to try and deal with their creatures. Hopefully you have a good, powerful start where you're on curve every turn, putting out, a creature on turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, and hoping you have enough removal to kind of deal with what they're putting on, and hopefully you can win out. Of course, Ashiok Dreamrender is going to be a very powerful card you bring in from the side. Maybe even Engineered Explosives, maybe even Abrade. You might have to, if you're playing a lot of Dredge, then you're going to have to adjust accordingly. I don't really know what number to give you on Not Magic. I guess 50-50, but you're probably not well suited for Dredge. There are a lot of decks that are not well suited for Dredge, honestly. It's just how it is with that deck. It's highly variant. They could have super explosive starts where turn 2 they have 6 creatures or 7 creatures on board and you're basically dead, or they're slowed down. It's really a random roll. So let's just say 50-50. Control decks, so you do have a lot of threats. Your opponents are going to have to deal with a lot of your creatures. Even if they counter one or remove one, you're going to have another one. So I feel like against control decks, you have a lot of play. You also have your own permission package to kind of protect your spells, which is also good. Your games are going to go on longer, and that's okay. And you could always bring in more permission from the side to kind of deal with those control decks. Blood Moon might be very useful to kind of shut down your opponent's lands, because again, usually with most control decks, if you shut down their lands early on, they're not going to be able to bounce back, assuming of course they don't counter your Blood Moon. So, and of course you have Veil of Summer on the side, which is also going to be very useful against those matchups. So actually I think you're relatively well placed, and you can grind out relatively well against control decks. So just my opinion. Last but not least, other mid-range decks. So how does Temur Knuckleblade Midrange fare against other mid-range decks? Believe it or not, 50-50. I don't think you're highly favored. I also don't think you're highly handicapped against mid-range decks. Really, it's going to come down to the draw. Luck of the draw. You have a lot of threats of your own. You have a lot of removal of your own to deal with the other mid-range decks. Let's just choose Jund, or pick Jund in this instance. But if you have a slow start and you have a turn 3 Liliana that you have to deal with, and you don't have an answer to it initially, that's going to be a problem for you. If you could get rid of Liliana, you're okay. But if you're in a lock with Liliana, it's going to be hard to make a creature stick. You're going to have to, lean heavy on your removal. That being said, there's plenty of tools you can bring in from the side, like Veil of Summer, or Abrade. And I think, again, base level 50-50. If you're an experienced pilot and you play with this deck enough, you could definitely increase your odds of winning against mid-range, and I think that's pretty good for a deck running Knuckleblade, Savage Knuckleblade. And that's it for Temur Knuckleblade Midrange. So it's been a while since I don't think I've deck teched a mid-range deck. Well, I guess my Tarmo Eldrazi deck, which I'm going to be returning to this month, by the way, is, I guess, considered a mid-range deck. But yeah, it's been a while since I've deck teched a Temur deck that's mid-range, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Give it a shot if you have the cards. I'm going to be posting up 3 matches today, as usual, of course, showing off this deck in action, just to give you an idea of how it plays. And yeah, I think it's a fun deck, and I think it's fun to be able to play a Temur deck and have Savage Knuckleblade as a 4 of in it, as opposed to just something people kind of peppered in because they think it's cute, which I've seen in the past, which is fine, I understand. I wanted something that went all in with Savage Knuckleblade, and I think this deck works out actually pretty well. I was pretty successful with it, so I'm kind of happy with this deck. So let me know what you're thinking in the comment section down below. Did I miss a card? Do you think I should put something in place of another? I really love to hear your feedback on that, of course. And, as usual, I will always return to these decks at some point, and I'll use that feedback in the future when I return to these decks to make improvements. So let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter or Facebook, whatever social media platform you prefer. Of course, all that helps with the grand algorithms on YouTube and everywhere that favor larger channels over smaller ones like mine and many others. So, you know, those simple little clicks do a lot for us. So thank you very much for it. If you want to become a patron, check out the Patreon link in the description. A big thank you to my current patrons and the ever-growing patronage that's going on, which I think is awesome. Thank you very much for your support. Check out the tiers. They're pretty cool. As a patron, at almost every tier, you're essentially guaranteed to win a giveaway every year. I send you rares and mythics that are not bulk. And at the end of every year, the longer you're a patron, the more you get, up to a limit, of course, because I don't have infinite amounts of cards. And that's my way of saying thank you for your support. So check out those different tiers and what you get. Thanks, and have a good one.